Welcome back to Ben's Book Club. Today we are diving into the book From Beirut to Jerusalem, unpacking Thomas Friedman's seminal explainer on the Middle East's incredibly complex geopolitical landscape. This National Book Award winner is a really fascinating mix. It's part memoir, part frontline war reporting, and part deep political analysis. We're going to trace Friedman's structural analysis to really understand how violence, ideology, religion, and power all collide in the daily lives of the people who actually live there. All right, so here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the journalist's journey, look at Beirut in collapse, then cover the Hama Rules explained. After that, we'll dive into Jerusalem and identity, and finally wrap up with tribes, flags, and legacy. Let's get into it. Section 1. The journalist's journey from Minnesota to the Middle East. To really get where Friedman is coming from, you have to look at this incredible timeline. He spent a full decade on the ground witnessing some absolutely pivotal historical shifts. He arrived in Beirut in 1979, right as the country was sliding into civil war. Then, in 1982, he covered the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. By 1984, he moved to Jerusalem, which ended up being perfectly timed to witness the buildup and eventual eruption of the First Intifada in 1987. He finally published his landmark book in 1989. And what he encountered during this 10 years was just far messier than any textbook could ever convey. So here is his crucial thesis, and it's a big one. You literally cannot understand this region through simple slogans or Western political ideologies alone. It just doesn't work. The most powerful force in politics there isn't rational self-interest. It's fear and identity. Every single side has its own profound historical grievances and its own absolute version of events. The result? A massive, daily collision of competing truths. Moving right along to Section 2, Beirut in collapse, the breakdown of a social contract. Imagine sitting down for dinner and someone asking you, would you like to eat now or wait for the ceasefire? Wild, right? But this surreal, darkly humorous quote perfectly captures how daily life and devastating anarchy unsettlingly coexisted in a completely fractured Beirut. Friedman was literally dodging snipers and interviewing warlords, while ordinary people were just trying to figure out when it was safe enough to have a meal. The basic rules of normal society had just vanished. To describe this absolute loss of civic institutions, Friedman actually coined a specific term, Lebanization. Beirut went from being called the Paris of the Middle East to a totally fractured war zone. And the core idea here is that when the state completely breaks down, people stop looking to the government for protection. Instead, they retreat entirely into their tribal identities. The reality of the civil war on the ground was just pure chaos. We're talking constant shelling and militias shifting their allegiances literally overnight. You had various factions, Christians, Druze, Sunnis, Shiites, and Palestinians, all retreating into protective tribalism. At the same time, you had the PLO operating essentially as a corrupt state within a state. This chaos eventually culminated in the 1982 Israeli invasion, which spiraled into an occupation, and that environment enabled the harrowing Sabra and Shatila massacre, where Lebanese Christian militias slaughtered Palestinian civilians while Israeli forces stood by. It was just complete institutional collapse. Okay, Section 3, the Hama Rules explained. This is all about power and survival in the Middle East. Friedman named this rather dark conceptual framework the Hama Rules. It's drawn directly from a 1982 event where the Syrian regime, under Hafez al-Assad, leveled the entire city of Hama just to crush a Muslim Brotherhood uprising. The takeaway here is that power in these authoritarian corners isn't about winning a political debate, right? It's about wielding overwhelming, terrifying violence to ensure your own regime's survival. So basically, when basic survival is at stake for these authoritarian regimes, the rules of engagement simply vanish. The rules are simple. There are no rules. It is a very stark reminder of how political power is exercised entirely without limits when a leader feels their existence is threatened. Let's transition over to Section 4. Jerusalem, Identity and Occupation, a deeply strained but functioning society. Now, in Israel, Friedman observed two totally distinct iterations of national identity constantly pulling at one another. On the one hand, you had the founding generation, these secular, incredibly idealistic labor Zionists. But on the other hand, he documented a newer, much harder-edged post-1967 generation. And this younger generation was shaped profoundly by the daily realities of military occupation. There's this quote from the text that I absolutely love. Israel is not simply a country, it is an argument. Because right beneath the surface geopolitics, the nation is constantly wrestling internally. It's an ongoing argument between secular and religious, left and right,
And fundamentally, it's the profound challenge of maintaining both a Jewish identity and a functioning democracy at the same time.
The First Intifada created these incredibly complex parallel realities. For Israeli society, governing millions of Palestinians inflicted very deep psychological costs, placing young soldiers in morally impossible positions and fueling the rise of a highly ideological settler movement. But simultaneously, intense frustration and resentment exploded among Palestinians, which was fueled by harsh daily realities like checkpoints and collective punishment. Out of all this friction, something profound was forged. The First Intifada wasn't just kids throwing stones in the street, you know? It was a powerful, grassroots declaration of an independent Palestinian identity. This sense of self-determination was forged directly by the shared experience of the occupation, and it happened largely separate from the PLO leadership that was sitting abroad. And that brings us to our final part, Section 5, Tribes, Flags, and Legacy, Why the Book Remains Relevant Today. This is probably Friedman's most famous framework, Tribes with Flags. He posits that many Middle Eastern states aren't really nation-states in the Western sense at all. They are artificial borders drawn by colonial powers on a map. Within those borders, sectarian, family, and tribal loyalties run infinitely deeper than any civic duty to a national flag. And this explains perfectly why Western-style nation-building frequently fails here. You can't just plant a flag and expect a nation to form. So what does this all mean when we zoom out? Well, in this region, power is dictated by fear and identity, not rational calculations. Outsiders frequently fail to grasp this because they consistently ignore the deep emotional roots of the conflict. Maintaining the current status quo is deeply corrosive for absolutely everyone involved. It damages Israeli democracy, and it denies Palestinian dignity. Understanding these enduring insights is absolutely essential for anyone trying to make sense of today's headlines. I want to leave you with this. Think about everything that has happened since 1989. The Oslo Accords, the Second Intifada, the Arab Spring, and all the recent tragic conflicts we've seen. Yet, despite all of that, the core dynamics of fear, identity, and competing truths remain deeply, deeply entrenched. So what has actually changed, and what disturbingly hasn't? Take a moment to consider how these historical patterns continue to shape our world today, and please subscribe so you don't miss an episode.